Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 78, which goes down this weekend. Saturday night, we're back at the Apex after a few weeks away, so we're going to get all that quiet noise, if you like, being able to hear the strikes, the corners, and we've got an interesting main event between Vicente Luque and Rafael Dos Anjos as well. On a card that doesn't scream excitement, at least pre-event, we could get to the event and all these fights be absolute firefights. But yeah, at least the main event is something that's definitely interesting. And I'm really looking forward to breaking the fight down. But just before we get there, as always, there's going to be a Base AI recap from last weekend's event at UFC Nashville. Base AI hit 66% across the straight pick prediction accuracy. But there was some really interesting predictions and numbers, which again, that's the reason why I run the recap podcasts on the AI. So if you are interested in AI within UFC and MMA as well, then make sure you check that out. It'll be on its own Base AI playlist on our YouTube channel at MMA Play 365, and that's youtube.com/MMA Play 365. But right now, straight into the breakdowns and predictions. The main event, Vicente Luque versus Rafael Dos Anjos. Now, there's red flags on both sides of this fight, and I kind of think that that's what makes it more interesting in regards to, there's a little bit of unpredictability. So we'll start with the Dos Anjos side. The red flags with Dos Anjos is the age. He's 38, 39 now. Of course, he's been in the UFC for a very, very long time. He's fought pretty much everyone that there is to have fought, especially at the top level, the highest level of competition. Now, the reason that that's a red flag is because at some point, that durability of Dos Anjos is going to absolutely break, and he's going to hit a big decline, and he's not going to be able to perform like he has done in his prime and over the years. So, although that's not massively present right now, in my opinion, at some point, that durability and that decline has to start. So, it will start at a certain point, at a certain fight. But pre-fight, I don't think he's at that stage yet, but it could be the fight that makes us watch it and think, okay, he's there now. And that's where the red flag is, because, like I said, at some point it's going to happen. The other side to Dos Anjos is he's keeps changing weight division. So he's at welterweight for some fights, he's lightweight for other fights, and he's up and down now. Again, towards the end of your career, when a decline's probably not a million miles away, again, that leads some questions of why is he fighting some fights at lightweight? Why is he going back up to welterweight? And again, it's just a question mark that adds to the potential red flag on the Dos Anjos side. Now, with Vicente Luque, the red flags on Luque is his last fight, for example. He got a potential career-changing beating from Jeff Neal, which did result in a bleed on the brain. Now, that was serious enough that for the UFC to allow Luque to fight, I believe he needed to get 2 independent doctors to clear him to fight, and he has had that clearance. So both doctors, 2 independent doctors, have said that for the next 12 months at least, that Luque is cleared to fight. So that's the good news. However, the reaction to what happened is, it's not great. It was a career-changing beating, like I've said. He was knocked out for the first time, and knocked out badly as well, where he face-planted the canvas. It had serious repercussions after the fight. So even from a physical perspective, there's question marks. But from the mental perspective, is Luque going to feel as free inside the cage? Is he going to be willing to exchange and go to war like he's done in previous fights? So again, the question marks add to the red flags. Now, in regards to Rafael Dos Anjos, now, going back to what we were talking about with the age and a potential decline. Now, the Bryan Barberena fight, we can't take too much from that. I do think it was just a really good stylistic fight for Dos Anjos, and Barberena, is probably not a million miles away from, towards the end of his career himself. But the Fiziev fight was the really interesting fight, because although Dos Anjos was beaten and he was knocked out, it took Fiziev till the 5th round to knock Dos Anjos out. It wasn't like a brutal knockout either, obviously a fair stoppage, but Dos Anjos was very competitive throughout the rounds. Now, one judge, I believe, gave Dos Anjos the last 2 rounds, the 3rd and the 4th round, obviously before the 5th round knockout, and to be fair, all 4 rounds were really competitive. Some were coin flip rounds as well. So the fact that Dos Anjos has being competitive still with a fighter like Rafael Fiziev, who is one of the most elite strikers in the UFC, doesn't scream a decline to me. So I still think there's something there from Dos Anjos. Now, what Luque's got going for him in this fight is, look, regardless of, what he looks like, what he may or may not perform like, Luque's still got massive power in both hands. And Dos Anjos is liable to get knocked out. Not more liable than any other fighter, but what I'm saying is, look, Luque hits hard. Dos Anjos can be knocked out. He was knocked out a couple of fights ago against Fiziev. And Luque doesn't really tire too badly. So even if the fight goes late into that 4th or 5th round, we could see a potential repeat of what happened in the Fiziev fight in regards to a late finish and Luque knocking Dos Anjos out. So both fighters have got a lot going for them in this fight, even though they've got red flags. And this is why I think the fight's really interesting. Now, from a stylistic perspective, I think that Dos Anjos does have a stylistic advantage in regards to the wrestling and grappling. Now, Luque's not a bad grappler, but he can be taken down, and he has been taken down in multiple fights. And Dos Anjos has seemed to have leaned more on the wrestling, the more or the closer he's got towards the end of his career. So the more he's got up there in age, he's not like brawling as much as what he used to and exchanging hard punches as what he used to. He has leaned more on the wrestling. And the real big gap in skill in this fight is, I believe that Dos Anjos is the much better grappler. So if he does get on top of Luque, Dos Anjos won't rush positions. He won't transition recklessly where Luque will sweep, reverse, or get back up to his feet. Dos Anjos can lay heavy when the time's right and then transition and pass when the time's right as well. So I really think that the grappling could be a big factor in this fight. And obviously the wrestling comes first. And I do believe that Dos Anjos' wrestling is good. And I think that Luque can be taken down. I don't think it's going to be easy for Dos Anjos, but again, I think that Dos Anjos has got more ways to win, because if this fight is a 25-minute kickboxing fight, sure, Luque is going to absolutely have every opportunity of knocking Dos Anjos out, but Dos Anjos also hits hard. He also is a very smart fighter. He's very technically gifted from a striking perspective as well. He's got multiple tools with the kicks, with the punches, combinations. And like I said, he's smart. He's got good awareness of danger. So even if this is a 25-minute kickboxing fight, I still wouldn't rule Dos Anjos out winning. But it's mixed martial arts, and I do think we're going to see takedowns. I do think we're going to see grappling, and I do think that favours the side of Dos Anjos. So although even if we get the best version of Luque and there's absolutely no red flags on him in the fight and he's trying to war and brawl and it's the same Luque as we've seen over the years, I still think there's a stylistic edge for Dos Anjos. So I'm not playing too much here in regards to the red flags and the question marks, because we haven't seen Dos Anjos clearly on a decline yet, so we can't presume that that's going to happen. And we also can't presume that Luque is going to be anything other than what we've seen prior to the Jeff Neal fight. So from a stylistic perspective alone, I'm picking Rafael Dos Anjos to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got Cub Swanson versus Hakeem Dawodu. Now, talking about fighters that are towards the end of the career, Cub Swanson's another one of them, been around the block, fought the best of the best, and has been in the UFC for absolute years. Whereas Hakeem Dawodu, he's still 32 years old, probably in and around his prime right now. He hasn't looked the most consistent fighter. I was going to say he hasn't looked great, but I don't think he's looked bad. He's just not really been consistent. He trades wins and losses, but he does have a really good base for MMA. His kickboxing, his Muay Thai is really solid. He's aggressive. He'll be in your face. He'll trade. He's got a good variety with his strikes, mixing between the punches, the kicks, the elbows, the knees. And because he's a good striker, he's developed a decent anti-wrestling game as well. So Dawodu will be competitive at a certain level in the UFC. And I think this is, to be fair to him, at that certain level. I don't think the fight's going to play out like the betting line suggests. You've got Cub Swanson at like a 2-1 dog. Dawodu, I think, is minus 250. I think the fight's going to play out much closer than the line suggests. Now, with Cub Swanson, the only issue that I've got with Cub Swanson is he's only won 3 fights since 2017. And those 3 fights have come against Kron Gracie, Darren Elkins, and Daniel Pineda. And I know I said from 2017, that's actually 3 wins out of his last 9 fights, and at 39 years old, it's tough to really know what you're going to get with Cub Swanson, but he's still going to be a game to fight. I don't think his durability is massively, at an all-time low or anything. I do feel that he's probably not as durable as what he once was, but Yeah, the fight's going to be close in my opinion. I think Swanson is going to be able to keep up with the striking of Dawodu to a certain extent, but the power's going to be coming back on Dawodu. And with Cub Swanson aging, and he has been finished, and he hasn't looked like the Cub Swanson that, we know and loved back in like 2015, 2016, I do think that there's definitely a concern that Dawodu lands something hard and knocks Swanson out. Now, if Swanson decides to wrestle and grapple, I think that's probably his path to victory, but Dawodu doesn't have a bad takedown defense game. You can get him down, of course. He's not impossible to take down, and you can never say never. It's just, I think that Dawodu is going to do a good job if Swanson wants to wrestle, trying to defend the takedowns, getting back out in space and working again, which if Swanson does fail on a couple of takedowns, it'll slowly start to break morale inside the cage as well. Like I said, I don't think the fight's going to reflect where the betting lines are at. But again, I can't pick Cub Swanson here against Hakeem Dawodu just because I know that Dawodu's aggressive. I know that Swanson is slowly starting to look towards the end of his career at 39 years old, like I've already said. So I can't look past the fact that if this goes to a decision, I think Dawodu can absolutely do enough, from a volume perspective and landing hard strikes to be able to take the decision. And if there's a finish, I do think it's more likely to be on Dawodu's side as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Hakeem Dawodu to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Khalil Rountree versus Chris Daukaus. This fight's supposed to have happened a few weeks ago. I think it was the Chris Daukaus side that fell through, but Chris Daukaus is making his light heavyweight debut in the UFC here, so he's coming down from heavyweight. I do think it's actually a good move for him, similar to Tanabosa as well. Daukaus was never the biggest heavyweight or even the most powerful heavyweight, but you could see in his physique that there was something there for him if he was dedicated and committing to losing some weight and cutting down to light heavyweight. Then there was that possibility for Daukaus. He was always a quick mover, fast with his hands as well at heavyweight. So again, it just makes sense for him to come down to light heavyweight, especially if it's not working out for him, which it isn't. He's been knocked out a couple of times now at heavyweight. And now he's making his light heavyweight debut against Khalil Rountree. So there are some question marks with Daukaus because we've got absolutely no idea what he's going to look like down at light heavyweight. Like we saw like I said, with Tanabosa, he came down and he got finished in round one against Kutalaba. Of course, he won last weekend in his second light heavyweight fight. But you just don't know what a fighter's going to look like, how they're going to handle the new physique in a competition perspective, because it's all well and good being comfortable in the gym, but once you're in the cage, it's completely different. How you're going to feel when the adrenaline starts flowing, when you're feeling your opponent, when you've got a hold of your opponent and you're testing yourself with the strength and the physical attributes that come within a fight. But from a stylistic perspective, I think that Daukaus is going to have a little bit of a rude awakening in regards to the speed and movement, because those are two big advantages he had at heavyweight, but I don't think those advantages are going to be as present at light heavyweight. Now, granted, Khalil Rountree isn't some lightning fast striker with crazy erratic movement, but I do think that Daukaus is at least going to be matched for speed here, which is something that he's not going to be used to. Now with the power, does the power come down with Chris Daukaus? Maybe it does, but Khalil Rountree's also got power himself. He's got no problems mixing things up as well, chopping the legs down, hitting hard punches, hard elbows. Daukaus, one path to victory, low key that he might have here is the wrestling and grappling. Now, it's not easy to get Rountree down, but I do think that Daukaus, if he just stands with Rountree, I do think he's going to experience a striking battle that he's not used to before. So I kind of feel like it might be a safer bet for Daukaus to level change and try and take Rountree down, where, typically over Rountree's career, those have been the holes and the flaws within his game. Of course, he's got a lot better and developed in those areas over the years as well, but for me, that's the path to victory for Daukaus. However, I do think it's a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet. And listen, Daukaus might come out here and knock Rountree out and look great, but Daukaus coming off a couple of knockouts, coming down in weight against a lifelong striker in Khalil Rountree, who is a very refined striker with good precision, good accuracy and good power himself. It just lays a little bit of concern for me on Daukaus' side until I've seen him as a light heavyweight, and the next fight that Daukaus fights at light heavyweight, this breakdown might be completely different. But like I said, there's always some concerns coming down from heavyweight, and in a heavyweight where Chris Daukaus had advantages in the speed and movement, those are going to be taken away from him, and it's really difficult to predict how Daukaus is going to be dealing with that. So I'm going to go for the natural light heavyweight here, and I'm picking Khalil Rountree to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Polyana Viana versus Iasmin Lucindo. And again, another interesting fight from a stylistic perspective. I think Lucindo's going to be the better striker here. I think she's going to be faster. She's more fluid on the feet. And in regards to the grappling side, Polyana Viana is that type of fighter that can be losing every minute of a fight until somebody puts her on her back, and then suddenly the armbar's being thrown up and she's submitted her opponent. Her ground game's sneaky good. So where Viana normally gets the better of her opponents is by just being the better grappler, and when the fight hits the mat, she's simply more dangerous. She causes panic, and eventually, more often than not, she gets the submission, and that's whether she's on her back or on top as well. She's got good offensive and defensive submission wins throughout her career and in the UFC as well. Now, where I think Viana's going to struggle here, and Viana, in my opinion, will just struggle in general when she fights a fighter that is probably going to be the better striker, the better mover with more volume, which in my opinion describes Lucindo, but where Viana can't get the better of that opponent on the ground either. And again, I can't rule out a submission from Viana because she is very, very tricky. And if this fight hits the mat, that's going to be her way to win the fight, should she win it, in my opinion. But Lucindo's also got a good ground game. So I'm not saying that it's a better ground game than Viana, because truthfully, I'm not too sure. We'll find out on the night. But Lucindo is comfortable enough on the mat where I don't think that she's going to get hit by an armbar or a triangle off her back or get swept and, choked out. Lucindo's got a good BJJ base herself, and that, at the very least, will allow her to be safe on the mat should the fight hit the mat. Now, when you look at the wrestling on either side I don't think is great. I would again give a slight edge to Lucindo, but for Viana to actually take Lucindo down, she's going to have to get close. She's going to have to try and clinch up with her. And Lucindo, I think, will do a better job with her striking, just keeping distance and just popping the jab out and point fighting. And even when she starts putting, 2 or 3 punches together with low kicks and things, I just feel like it's going to halt Viana's fluid momentum to try and level change or get close to Lucindo to clinch up with her to get takedowns. So I do think that when all's said and done, it's going to be a fight that's more likely to win and lose from the striking perspective, on the feet standing, rather than, a ton of grappling. We might see some takedowns, a couple of takedowns. We might see a little bit of grappling work, but I just don't think that it's going to be more significant action than what we see on the feet. And I think the majority of the fight will play out on the feet as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Iasmin Lucindo to win the fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that I'm actually really looking forward to. I think it's one of the better fights on the card, or at least one of the more intriguing fights on the card. We've got Tafon Nchukwi versus AJ Dobson. Now, the first thing just to outline here is Tafon Nchukwi, like I mentioned with Dos Anjos, of course, Dos Anjos was more geared towards the end of his career, but Nchukwi does switch divisions quite a lot. So he came in as a light heavyweight. He tried down at middleweight, then he went back up to light heavyweight, and now he's coming back down to middleweight as well. Now, the dude's an absolute unit. He's big, he's strong, he's physical. The thing is, I'm not actually sure which division I think is better in. I just think it's opponent dependent. I'm not sure exactly where his ceiling is as a fighter in the UFC, because he does have some good wins and he has looked good in a lot of fights. Like, he was looking great against Asmat Mirzakhanov until, of course, the flying knee landed, real strange comeback win from Mirzakhanov in that 3rd round. He got knocked out against Carlos Ulberg, so that's something to analyse. But again, I think that Carlos Ulberg is a beast and will knock a lot of fighters out. So, can you penalise Nchukwi too much for that? I'm not too sure. But all I know is at middleweight, I do think that he's going to be absolutely just a physical beast inside the cage. I think when Dobson gets a hold of him and really tries to, test his physicality against Nchukwi's, I think it's just going to be a completely different level. The one thing that I think might affect Nchukwi moving down in weight is the potential cardio. I'm not saying he's got a cardio issue, but the volume, I think, might be a little bit lower at middleweight than what it can be at light heavyweight, just because he doesn't want to risk tiring out later in a fight. So there's some real variables in this fight. Now, from AJ Dobson's side, I'm not overly impressed at all with Dobson. Now, we've heard multiple people say that Dobson's this freak athlete, freakish power, he's a standout wrestler, and he's got all these natural gifted abilities. But in all fairness to Dobson, we're yet to see them. I'm not saying they're not there, and this might be a fight where we absolutely see Dobson look phenomenal, but the pause and the questions with that I use an example from last week with Alexa Kama. Even up until the run-in of that Alexa Kama fight last week, people were still saying that Kama is this physical, phenom. He's really elite in the gym, and he's physically gifted as a fighter, and all this sort of stuff. And we hadn't seen it this is all stuff that we've heard since the Contender Series for Kama. And we've heard it all through his career and even till last weekend as well, and we're still yet to see it. So it's one thing being told something and people hyping a fighter up, like coaches and training partners and all that sort of stuff. But until we see it in the cage, it's really hard to, put too much trust in what you're hearing. And like I said, from what I've seen of Dobson, I do think he's a fast striker. I do think his hands are going to be a lot faster than Nchukwi's. I just think that with Nchukwi, I think he's going to be the better quality striker. I think he's got more variety in regards to the kicks, the punches. I just think he's a better technical fighter than Dobson. It's just I think Dobson's going to have a speed and a movement advantage here. In regards to the wrestling, again, Dobson might try and wrestle Nchukwi. But Nchukwi's, again, he's going to be an absolute beast, a physical beast inside the cage. And it's going to be very difficult to take him down just because of that. But then he does have good takedown defense as well. He does train in a gi, I believe. And, he does compete in jiu-jitsu tournaments. So he's got BJJ to get back up to his feet. I just think it's going to be a difficult fight for Dobson unless Dobson uses that speed and movement and starches Nchukwi and knocks him out. I think that's a possibility. I wouldn't say it's a puncher's chance. I don't think that Dobson just has to, be lucky to find that one punch that lands clean. I think he can materialise a win for himself in that manner, so that's not a puncher's chance. But outside of Dobson just lighting Nchukwi up and knocking him out, I think Nchukwi is going to be the better quality striker. I think from a wrestling perspective, he's going to be able to keep the fight upright. If the fight does hit the mat and Nchukwi's on top of Dobson, I think Dobson will have a lot of issues there as well. So, yeah, look, unless I actually see Dobson, and again, I've said it already on this podcast, the next time I break Dobson's fight, it might be a different breakdown. But like I said, I've heard all this, promising stuff with Dobson, standout wrestler, freak athlete, lightning in regards to the striking and, shines inside the gym. I just need to see it inside the cage first. And until I do that, I'm not going to be able to pick him against a fighter like Nchukwi. So I'm picking Tafon Nchukwi to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Josh Fremd versus Jamie Pickett. And this is an interesting fight from, whoever loses the fight's perspective. It's going to be really interesting because I don't think that either fighter is in a strong position in the UFC. I think that they're both in the lower end of the UFC, and maybe the fight's being made to find out what happens. I don't know. That's narrative. But at least from Josh Fremd's side, he's coming off a win, a good win as well, where he finished Cedriques Dumas, and Fremd was a big underdog in that fight as well. And Fremd's also lost a couple of fights in the UFC, but they've been to decent level opponents, whereas Jamie Pickett's on a 3-fight losing streak. Again, I'm not saying it's against bad opponents, but he's on a 3-fight losing streak. Not many fighters survive a 4-fight losing streak. But from a stylistic perspective, I do think that the fight's going to be competitive. I think that both fighters are very similar in regards to style. They probably both prefer to strike, but, they can both wrestle and grapple to an extent. It's just with Josh Fremd, I think he's the better wrestler in this fight, both offensively and defensively. I think that if the fight hits the mat, his grappling and jiu-jitsu is going to be better than Pickett's as well. And then even when you're looking at the striking, I think Pickett will be able to work to a certain level. But again, I think Josh Fremd's going to have more success striking as well. Pickett can be a little bit low volume at times, although he has had fights where he's randomly just ramped that volume all the way up and, shut anybody up saying that he's a low volume fighter. But then he'll go back to another fight where he's relatively low volume again. So I think from a striking perspective, very close, but slight advantages for Fremd. I think the wrestling and grappling goes to Fremd as well. And then when you're looking at activity inside the cage and power, again, probably edges towards Josh Fremd as well. So I don't think it's a fight where Jamie Pickett's going to get absolutely run through. I just think it's going to be one of those fights that's very close, that's relatively competitive, that one fighter is just edging, more rounds than he's not. And I kind of feel that fight is going to be Fremd. And if there is a finish, I definitely think it's more likely to be on Fremd's side than Pickett's as well. So I do feel that Pickett's really got to put in the performance of his life here to get the win. And I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility, but when I'm breaking a fight down, analysing the fight from a stylistic perspective and where either fighter is better and potential ways to win the fight, I just keep coming back to Fremd. So for those reasons, I'm picking Josh Fremd to win the fight. Next up, we've got Marcus McGhee versus JP Buys. It's been a while since we've seen JP Buys inside the cage. Of course, he went through some personal issues which unfortunately were publicised, and, there's people out there that, make the comments and, say what they're going to say. I'm not going to get into it, but, that had to have taken some sort of effect on him. But like I say, he's back inside the cage, and I'm really happy to see him back as well, because I do think he's a fighter with good qualities, with a good skill set, and I do think that he's a fighter that the UFC should keep around, because he'll definitely get wins inside the UFC. And yeah, I like JP Buys. His style's good, and I think he's got a winnable style as well. However, with that being said, he is another fighter that's on a 3-fight losing streak. But again, you look at those opponents: Bruno Bulldog Silva, solid opponent; Montel Jackson, solid opponent. And last time out, Cody Durden, who is, on a crazy 4-fight win streak, beating some really good fighters. So none of those losses have really aged badly. And if anything, it's the other way around. And JP Buys, apart from Cody Durden, he had some good moments against Bruno Bulldog Silva. He had some good moments against Montel Jackson as well, and he just fell short. But look, those, like I say, aren't 3 bad losses. And I think if you put Marcus McGhee in front of those 3 fighters, he might end up on a 3-fight losing streak as well. And the one thing that I'm going to say right now is I think the betting lines are absolutely fucked for this fight. I cannot believe that JP Buys is a 3-1 underdog. Now, does it mean that I think he's going to win the fight? No, that doesn't mean that. So spoiler alert, I am picking Marcus McGhee to win. But is the fight going to play out with JP Buys looking like a plus 300 dog? I'd be surprised. And look, like I say, I'm not picking Buys to win the fight, but the line is just way, way off. Now, from Marcus McGhee's perspective, he's a good grappler. He's a very experienced grappler. He's dangerous. He's got submissions. He's very positionally aware, and he can really overwhelm opponents with his grappling. And because of that, because he knows that, he's very aggressive on the feet, because if you take him down, he's not going to care so much, because he can hit submissions, or he can sweep, or if he doesn't submit or sweep, then he's got the ability to get back up to his feet, which again allows him to be overly aggressive on the feet, come forwards. He's got power, and like I say, he'll get in the face of his opponent. But going back to the betting line, you look at last time out, I kind of think there's a lot of market overcorrection here, because Marcus McGhee came in on short notice, making his UFC debut. He was a big underdog, and he absolutely smoked his opponent, ran through the opponent, finished the fight, and made that wide line look absolutely ridiculous. But the thing is, that was against Journey Newson, and I don't mean any disrespect, but Journey Newson, it's not as if it was like last week, for example, Diego Lopez versus Movsar Evloev. I know Diego Lopez didn't beat Evloev, but it's not as if it was that level of opponent. Journey Newson, yes, is a UFC caliber fighter. Some may argue different. I personally think he's okay. But it's not as if he's like a top 15 guy. Marcus McGhee came in there as a big underdog, looked amazing, and I kind of think that the market is overreacted because of that. And with JP Buys, I do get it. He has looked a little bit chinny, and he does look like he can be got at. And that's the reason ultimately why I'm picking Marcus McGhee, because I do think McGhee's aggressive. I do think he's got power, and I do think he's got a good grappling game, which, again, is going to help him in this fight. But when it comes to the wrestling here, I think it's going to be JP Buys hitting the takedowns. If McGhee submits him off his back, fair enough. I personally don't think that's going to happen. I think McGhee will be able to get back up to his feet, and if Buys wins this fight, it's more likely going to be a decision where he's hit, 6, 7, 8, 9 takedowns and not being hurt or dropped or rocked. But that's where the problem comes in. I do think he's a little bit, he's been dropped, wobbled and knocked out a little bit too much lately to cause some hesitancy on him. And Marcus McGhee has absolutely got the power to be able to hurt Bays. But outside of that, I think it's Bays that's going to be controlling the majority of the fight. It's just I can't pick him to win because, again, I think McGhee does have a good grappling game where Bays is likely going to take the fight. And again, it's possible that McGhee is too aggressive and powerful on his feet for Bays to be able to withstand the strikes. So, real bad betting line, but I am picking Marcus McGhee to win this fight. And talking of short notice, in steps Terrance McKinney versus Mike Breeden. So yeah, Terrance McKinney got drafted into this fight just, I think it was like a week ago. And I think Breeden's actually got a more difficult opponent here than his previous opponent that he was preparing for, which is Lando Venata. Completely different styles of fighters. Like Lando Venata is a fighter that will go 3 rounds hard. So at least Breeden was preparing to go 3 hard rounds, whereas Terrance McKinney obviously does drop off a little bit after round 1. I don't think he's going to be completely shot in this fight if he does get out of round 1. It's just Mike Breeden. He's going to have more chance of success outside of the first round. But the thing is, when you're looking at this fight from a skill set perspective, Terrance McKinney, in my opinion, is going to be the better wrestler. He's going to be the better grappler. Definitely going to be more dangerous on the mat. He's a submission threat when the fight gets down to the mat as well. And from a striking perspective, look, Breeden's got bricks in his hands. So when Terrance McKinney does start striking and brawling, that might be where Breeden does have opportunities to land on McKinney and potentially hurt him and knock him out. But again, Terrance McKinney is really fast and explosive on the feet with a ton of power as well. I do kind of see the ceiling for McKinney now. I don't think it's as high as what maybe some people thought it might have been, including myself. But I do think he definitely beats a certain level of opponent. And I think Breeden is within that UFC caliber certain level of opponent. I do think that Breeden's going to have a storm to weather. And look, he might weather it for a round. But I do think McKinney, although, like I say, you can't say he's going to come on a million miles stronger outside of round 1, but I still think he's going to be there in round 2 if this fight makes round 2. And again, if it goes into round 3 and McKinney's won the first 2 rounds and drastically slowed down, it'll be on Breeden to finish, which then, it's looking more of an improbability. So I think McKinney, like I say, definitely in that first round, he's going to be fast, he's going to be powerful, he's going to be explosive, he's going to have better wrestling, good takedowns, he's going to have the better grappling with a submission threat as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Terrance McKinney to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Francis Marshall versus Isaac Dulgarian. Now, Dulgarian's supposed to have made his UFC debut against Dan Argueta. And to be honest with you, looking at how Dan Argueta performed last time out against Ronnie Lawrence, that would have been an insane fight. So I kind of wish the UFC had remade that fight. But here, Francis Marshall is still a really good opponent for Isaac Dulgarian because, look, the one thing Marshall's going to have on his side here, I think, is size, strength and physicality. So I said one thing, there's multiple things there, of course, but I think Marshall's definitely going to have a size and physical advantage over Isaac Dulgarian, who, again, Dulgarian's one of those fighters that have, fought in multiple weight divisions. So it's going to be interesting to see where his division actually lies. Like, he might get in here against Francis Marshall, not be able to implement his game plan, and then just decide to drop down in weight just because, this opponent or this weight of opponent is just too much for him to really be successful inside the cage. But for those that don't know anything about Isaac Dulgarian, he's 5-0. He's got all 5 wins by finish in round 1 as well. He's also got 4 amateur fights. All 4 amateur fights he won in round 1 by finish, of course, obviously. And that does create a question mark of what the hell is Isaac Dulgarian going to look like outside of round 1. Now, the other things to look at when you're trying to answer that question, if you can't physically see it, is, you look at his background. He's a standout wrestler. So wrestlers generally do have decent cardio, especially when it comes to them wrestling and not being forced to strike. And Dulgarian is a very good wrestler, really good entries, really well-timed entries. He completes takedowns at a high percentage as well. Very rare that he'll miss on a takedown. If he does, he'll reset and go again. And it's that type of relentless wrestling where I think he'll just be able to rinse and repeat. So if this fight does come out of round 1 and goes into 2 and 3, I'm not expecting Dulgarian to gas. If he does, and he does tire out badly, I'm not going to be overly surprised because it's something that we haven't seen. But just a fighter with that type of wrestling background, I just don't think is going to gas out, at least not easily. I do think that Dulgarian's going to have to do a lot of work against Francis Marshall because I kind of feel like Marshall might be the better striker here. We haven't seen a great deal of the striking of Dulgarian, but the small snippets and moments we have seen, he doesn't look sloppy. He doesn't look like he doesn't know what he's doing, if that makes sense. And the striking sets up the takedowns really well. Again, if you've got a good blend with your MMA wrestling, you're going to have that good quality of striking as well to be able to strike and then, like I said, mix and blend that wrestling in. And because Dulgarian's so successful with it, I think Dulgarian's going to be a potential problem for some fighters. Now, is one of those fighters going to be Francis Marshall? I definitely think Marshall's going to have his hands full in this fight. I think Marshall's probably got to try and keep this fight standing because, look, Marshall likes shooting takedowns as well, but I just don't know how successful he's going to be against a smaller fighter like Dulgarian trying to get into the hips a little bit lower than what he's used to, and Dulgarian also being the fighter with the wrestling background as well. So I think Marshall's path to victory here is keep it standing, defend the takedowns, and look to try and break Dulgarian with the striking, take him into deep waters, and let's find out what his cardio looks like. But I kind of feel like Dulgarian's going to have that relentless wrestling performance that we see from, other fighters like, your Merab Dvalishvilis and your Ricky Simone's. I think Dulgarian's got that base. He's got that physique, that physique. You can tell he's got that wrestling background, and that's how I feel the fight's going to play out. So for those reasons, I'm picking Isaac Dulgarian to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Josh Parisian versus Martin Buday. And yeah, it's one of those heavyweight fights that could potentially be really fun to watch, but really sloppy, low volume type of fight. And again, I don't mean that in any disrespect. It's just, we've seen before in these fights where, the technical ability is not quite there, but both fighters are pushing forwards, looking to get the better of their opponent. And I still feel that, look, Josh Parisian, he's going to win some fights in the UFC. Of course, he has won in the UFC already, but I just feel that Martin Buday, although he's not a fighter I believe is going to, hit the top 10, 15, I do think he's a fighter that, again, will beat a certain level of opponent in the UFC heavyweight division, and Parisian is that certain level of opponent. With that being said, though, I do think Buday's got to do one of two things. He's either got to ramp his volume up, or he's got to be able to mix the martial arts up inside the cage, so the volume isn't the only factor that is being assessed by, the judges. And of course, if he's low volume, then, he's not got as many opportunities to knock his opponent out, which in the heavyweight division, you want to give yourself every opportunity to do that. But like I say, I think he's the better mixed martial artist. I think Parisian might actually do better on the feet, slightly better, with volume, maybe just, throwing some calf kicks in there. But Buday, he's the type of fighter that will like to get close, like to clinch up, wear on you against the cage, land some dirty boxing, some knees inside the clinch. If he can take you down, he'll get on top as well. I don't think Parisian is a fighter that's going to be able to consistently get up from bottom against somebody like Buday, who's laying on top of him, big, heavy, topside guy. So, yeah, look, I think Parisian's going to do an okay job on the feet. I think if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight out in open space, then Parisian's going to have every chance of winning the fight. It's going to be one of those, close, ugly, grindy, dirty, split decision types of fights. Now, if the fight doesn't play out on the feet for 15 minutes at space, then I think Buday is going to win the fight. And ultimately, I think it's going to be difficult for Parisian to not only keep the fight standing, but keep it in open space. Because even if the fight stays standing, I think Buday will be closing the distance and being able to, push Parisian up against the cage and slowly steal and edge the rounds away from Parisian. I just feel it's a big ask for Parisian to do the two things of A, keep the fight on the feet, and B, keep it at his space. I think that's going to be the difficult part. I think Buday is going to be the fighter that's, controlling the range of the fight, and that's going to be key. So for those reasons, I'm picking Martin Buday to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Montserrat Ruiz versus Jaqueline Amorim. Now, Jaqueline Amorim came into the UFC, looked, really good on the regional scene, really dangerous from a jiu-jitsu perspective, and, had that UFC debut as a big favourite, hyped up a little bit, and it just didn't materialise. But the amount of times that we've seen the script of, real exciting potential fighter coming into the UFC, especially in the women's divisions as well, turns out to be a really big favourite against a fighter that everyone's expecting it to be, who's a fighter in the UFC that's not really had some good performances lately, and then the fighter who's the big favourite just doesn't turn up, doesn't perform. but then looks great the next time out that we see them. That script and that story has been seen so many times over the years, and I think history is gonna repeat itself here. Look, Amorim wasn't on a game last time out. I think she was maybe a bit too overconfident, thought the win was in the bag before she even stepped in the cage, just like the majority of the public and the bookies did as well. And that wasn't the case. I think this fight we see a little bit more from Amorim in regards to, her dictating where the fight goes, which is going to be key here. Like, Montserrat Ruiz is a fighter that I think prefers to be on top, but is she going to want to take Amorim down? Amorim, does have really, really good jiu-jitsu. That's where she's strongest. I think Ruiz would be better served here trying to keep space, keep distance, and trying to be aggressive on Amorim and out-volume her, put strikes on Amorim, because I do think Ruiz is more of an in-your-face type of fighter with slightly, I won't say better striking, but more dangerous striking, more overwhelming striking, whereas Amorim is going to want to get the fight to the mat. It's just, I think this fight is the fight that she's going to be able to dictate where the fight goes. I think Amorim is going to be able to put Ruiz down on the mat, and I think Amorim will do good work on top of Ruiz, where there should be a big gap in skill in the jiu-jitsu and the grappling, with Amorim on top and with Ruiz on bottom. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jaqueline Amorim to win this fight. And talking of that exact same type of fight, we've got Juliana Miller versus Luana Santos. And although Luana Santos isn't like the -3, -400 favourite or whatever Amorim was in a UFC debut, Luana Santos is coming into a UFC debut who's looked like a relentless wrestler with a good top game. And that's where she really likes her fights to go, and that's where she likes fights to sit. And like I said, although she's not a heavy favourite, she's still a favourite nonetheless against Juliana Miller, who's coming off, a fight where everyone expected her to win, and she didn't. And now she's in this fight as an underdog. So has there been a lot of market overcorrection? There's a lot of things that you can really put into this fight to try and determine, why one fighter's a favourite, why one fighter's an underdog. And it's going to be interesting to see it playing out because, like I said, you look at Jaqueline Amorim, she looked amazing pre-UFC. She came into a debut and didn't look anything like what she'd looked previously. And Luana Santos, although her wrestling looks a little bit sketchy, she does more often than not find ways to put her opponent on the back, and she'll sit on top, and she's then very difficult to get off that top position, and normally finishes the round on top after the takedown, and wins rounds that way. The thing is with Juliana Miller, she's actually got a decent grappling game herself, and she's going to be scrambly. She's not going to settle on her back. She'll be trying for submissions. She'll be looking to get back up to her feet. So again, it's one of those where I'm really unsure how the fight's going to play out, because we've got so many narratives on either side of history. History is going to repeat itself one way or another, but is it going to go on with Juliana Miller winning the fight after she's just lost a fight that she should have won, technically, according to the public and the bookies? Or is it going to give Luana Santos the win, and maybe Miller isn't what we thought that she was? So it's a really difficult fight to analyse and break down, and till we actually see it, because like I say, Santos's base is taking her opponents down and sitting in guard, maybe passing to half guard, and just doing just enough for the referee not to split them up. But Miller prefers fights to go to the mat, and even if that means that she's on her back, she'll look for a sweep, she'll look for a reversal, and on the feet, I kind of feel that it's going to be tough. Like, Miller might be the more technical striker, but I think that Santos lands heavier. She'll look for a big overhand right, and because of that, she can back her opponents up, and that's what allows her to close the distance and get the fight to the mat. It's tough. I am going to be siding with the newcomer though, in the favourite with Luana Santos, just because I do like the fact that she will be hunting to get the fight down to the mat at all times. And if she does get a fight or an opponent down on the mat, she does lay heavy on top, and she does look like she's got good control in stopping any sweeps, reversals and stand-ups. And that's the side that I'll pretty much always favour when I'm a little bit unsure about a matchup. So for those reasons, I'm picking Luana Santos to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening, whether that's on YouTube or one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, all the other good places where the podcasts land on. So, yeah, thank you for tuning in. If you are on YouTube, you want to leave a comment, tell me who you're betting, tell me who you're picking to win the fights. If we disagree, tell me why. Again, I always try and make time to get back to people that do comment and want to talk fights through the YouTube comments. And yeah, look, if you're betting, I hope you crush the bookies. Unless you're betting against my fighter, then as always, I hope you lose. And until next week, I'm Newsome. Thank you for listening.